In terms of today's session, let's get going with the session today. We've put together our expert panel from Champion to discuss where the future of workplace health lies and really wrapping up the last year. Now, speaking to the likes of Jim, Laura, Dan, Jack, I think, first of all, organisations and our organisations are experiencing high levels of fatigue, and we don't want to hide away from that. The last couple of years, big challenges. We know why. We don't need to elaborate on that area. But next year, what we want to do is to provide you in the next hour with an uplifting session that you can take one thing, and that's all we ever ask you to do, take one thing and implement it into next year so you can support your people in the best possible way. So we'll be covering our 5 top predictions off the back of the latest research and insights into workplace health from our experts today. So the graphics are very Christmas themed as well, as you can tell. So in terms of today's session, please use the chat for any questions that you've got. If you want anonymity in terms of it, just put brackets "anon" at the end of your message, and we'll look to read them out and get through as many of them as possible. And the session recording and slides will be sent to you after the event. The one challenge that we often have is scribbling down our notes fast enough, especially at the speed that the likes of Jim work at. And so what we'll do is send that through to you afterwards so you can come back to that anywhere, anytime, any place. And so good morning to everyone else that's just joined as well in terms of today's live session. If you do take something away from today's live session, it's completely free. We'd love you to tell a colleague, tell a friend, tell someone in the workplace health space about Champion. So when we keep putting on these live sessions, they're getting the value from it as well. Now, who's this session for? It's not for pugs with Christmas hats on. We just, again, wanted to spread a little bit of the Christmas cheer. It's for anyone, again, that wants to really prioritise employee wellbeing within their organisations. So for HR directors, for CEOs, FDs, that are wanting to prioritise wellbeing, but also the boots on the ground. If you're an employee, if you're a champion of wellbeing, excuse the awful pun, this session is for you today. And so that's what we've tailored it towards. Who it's not for is for the people that don't care about wellbeing. That's what we want, is to build a community of people that truly want to invest time and resource into employee wellbeing. Now, we thought as well, we've had a lot of these live sessions in the last year. We've had a lot of success and amazing feedback off the back of it. But we thought for the final live session, and Jack, you don't need to tear up. I know it's emotional having our final live session of the year. We thought we'd do a little bit of workplace health bingo. Now, at the Christmas do that we had last week, we had something called Bliss versus Brent, where people guessed whether it was a phrase from me or a phrase from David Brent. And I got all of them wrong, unfortunately. And so what we thought we'd do today is a workplace health bingo. So if you hear any of these phrases that I'm sure many of us have used, especially unprecedented, had to work very hard in not having that in my introduction, or a nice to have versus a need to have, hybrid working, Zoom fatigue, just type in the chat the specific phrase and type in workplace health bingo as we go along. So hopefully it will just bring a little bit of extra fun to today's session as well. So in terms of the host today, it's amazing to see many people that I know already and all the faces that I know, but it's even better to see some new people in terms of today's session. So for a quick introduction to me, I'll be hosting today's session. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Champion Health, and I founded Champion 4 years ago with the vision of making wellbeing more inclusive, more accessible, and more engaging. Now, along the way, many of you are aware of this story. I was mentored by someone that worked in the FTSE 100. He was a global director, and he invested a huge amount of time into me. And whilst we had a very clear vision with wellbeing and what our platform needs to do and needs to achieve, I didn't know how to run a business. I was 24 at the time, and James was the person to invest that time into me and support Champion. And we wouldn't be working with the NHS through to global banks if it wasn't for James. Now, James lived with positive mental health throughout his life, and tragically, he ended up taking his own life 3 years ago following a short bout of stress. And that's the fire in my belly. I don't think we would have achieved what we've achieved today if it wasn't for the likes of James and his support. And it's led to us winning the inspirational mental health story at the Mental Health and Wellbeing Awards in the last year as well, which I'm incredibly proud of, and to lead this fantastic team of 60 wellbeing gurus, technology specialists, and operational specialists as well. So I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn if we're not already. Then in terms of the 4 experts that we're going to call upon today. So in the top left is my former tutor, turned friend and colleague, Professor Jim McKenna. Now, if there's anything that Jim doesn't know, it's not worth knowing, quite simply. The challenge that you've got is keeping up with Jim in today's session. So that is why we've made it specific that we can have the session recording afterwards. Jim will talk about everything behavioural science, behavioural change, and has taught me a huge amount in terms of the way to build a gamified platform that is really inclusive to everyone and gets comeback behaviours. So really excited for Jim to share his knowledge and expertise today. In the bottom left, we've got Jack Green, and Jack used to run around for a living. You can see a couple of the vests that he used to sport, the Great Britain vests, and performed at 2 Olympic Games and did extremely well within there. Has worked for BBC Studios as their global wellbeing lead, and now is head of performance at Champion Health, really leading everything in terms of performance and wellbeing when it comes to our platform and our approach. Third is Dan Craig, and Dan has a wealth of experience when it comes to wellbeing, has worked with global organisations from Saint-Gobain and Accenture on supporting them with their wellbeing strategy and their wellbeing needs and wants as well. Dan is leading the wellbeing side of things at Champion and consulting with our members to enable organisational change as well as individual behaviour change with employees. So extremely fortunate to have Dan along with us today. And last but not least is Laura Dallas, the queen of the spreadsheets, as we call her. Everything around the tech, the algorithms, personalisation, Laura knows it all. Laura's background is very unique, having worked in the NHS, working within psychology, transferring then through to algorithms development design within the Champions platform. Laura heads up the product, and we've got a fantastic brain there of loads of expertise that hopefully we're going to get loads out of in terms of today's session. So a huge welcome to our panelists for today and to you in today's session. So the 5 workplace health predictions, we've got them blurred out. We'll unravel them as we go. The first one is all about personalisation when it comes to well-being. And when we look at the tech giants from Netflix all the way through to Apple, Spotify, Uber, everything's personalised and focused on the end user. And one of our biggest predictions is that is exactly where well-being needs to move to if we're not there already. So my first question is to yourself, actually, Laura, in terms of what is the importance of personalising a user journey when it comes to a workplace health strategy?
Sure, it's a massive question, but one that's so important, and actually one that we have already been talking a lot about for a long time, but I really think that in the next year it's going to be really key because there isn't an average employee. You know, everybody is unique. It's the human way. And actually, if we create blanket initiatives, then it's just not going to have the impact. So I guess in terms of my experience developing the platform and supporting our clients, there's the 3 areas. There's the moral case, there's the financial case, and then there's a business case. So if we think about it from a moral perspective, when you personalize the initiatives, they're going to have more impact. They're going to resonate with people more. If you have something generic, then it's just not going to hit the same. From a financial case, if we think kind of business-wise, then you don't want to be misallocating resources. Yep. You know, as a leader, you could be spending lots of time investing in something that actually isn't relevant or going to be impactful for your particular people. And then from a business case, I think if you nail that personalization, then it will help that positive culture of well-being grow, because it's something that resonates with the individuals and will help them to engage. So I think personalization is so important and something I'm so passionate about, but it's also something that's very difficult to get right because people are unique, and that is also a challenge in terms of how we actually make that personalization possible.
And I think there's some really important points within there around that business element. And Jim, I'm going to come over to you in a moment's time. And the big thing I wanted to ask you, Jim, was around the tech giants, what they're doing in personalizing their platforms, in their approaches. What can we learn from them from a behavioral change angle to be able to engage our employees?
Some of the really important big shifts are, and I'm no doubting what Laura has said is absolutely bang on the money, but they don't start there. It's really important not to feel like people are being singled out or that they're being found to be faulty in some kind of way. And what the really smart, savvy groups are working on is how to mobilize the social, the positive social norms and positive peer pressure. And I'm not meaning this in a horrible way in any sense. It's about, you know, it's about what surrounds us. What water do we swim in that makes us behave in the best possible way we can? And so what that allows us to do is when Dan does something and Jack does something, without them knowing it, I will synchronize with them. And that this is a basic biological process that happens with all of us. We try to synchronize with the people around us. And if we can get really positive stories, we can get really positive behaviors, we can then start to change. And at that point, the individualized element starts to really work because we have the behavior in place first.
Yeah.
This is a big mistake in many organizations, that you have to be motivated to start something happening. That's almost invariably only 1 in 10 people can do that. What we tend to do is we do the behavior first. So find them a really good opportunity to try a behavior, enjoy it, now activate the individualized element.
Are there any examples that you can provide to the listeners in terms of how they could do that from an organizational perspective? Or
I think one of the really easy examples is just to create an event so someone can come along and try something. You know, it's sitting on a desk somewhere and you pick it up and you try that and you go, I like that. And you see that smile on their face. That's a person who can now take on an individualized approach. But they need that tryout first and that moment of delight. When they experience that moment of delight and they can see its personal relevance, that's the signal that you can go somewhere.
And in terms of personalisation, Dan, I know you deal more on the organisational angle. Laura's very much focused on that product angle. How can we individualise our actual wellbeing strategies as an organisation? Is it through listening sessions? Is it through data, which we may or may not come on to shortly? How does that work from that personalisation of the wellbeing strategy?
Well, I think this is really interesting. For me, you can liken an individual journey of behavior change to an organization as well. Lots of the same steps apply, but just in very different ways. So if I use an individual to set the scene for this answer, Harry, if I approached you, or if you approached me actually and said you wanted to change the way that you exercise, you want to be fitter or something like that, and you ask me for my support, the first thing I'm not going to do is just basically give you an exercise routine and hope for the best and send you on your way. I'm going to have to spend time getting to know you, get to know your point of reference on things, your worldview, your experience, your feelings of enjoyment and things you like and don't like and all of that, and then put a case together as to the best fit for you in order to achieve that goal. And the same applies with organizations. You know, Laura, you're absolutely spot on. Unless you're an identical twin, what two people are the same? Nobody is. And organizations are the same too. There's no organizations that are the same. So in order to make sure that the impact lands and we get as good engagement as possible, we have to spend as much impactful time as possible with organizations to understand who they are, where their people are, what their culture is, what their senior leadership is like, what their buy-in and so on, what things they've done in the past, what their visions and hopes and dreams are for the future. Get all of those things together, and then you've got a much better case on which you can base that strategy. We tend to overcomplicate the strategy element quite a bit, but once you've got those kind of feeder inputs, it starts to become a lot more simple. And most importantly, it becomes a lot easier for the organization themselves to actually action and roll out and then see the benefits of. So it's super important. It's difficult to do, but with the right investment, the right tools and so on, it's absolutely possible. And we've certainly seen that in the champion team successfully. So yeah, that's my thoughts there, I think.
And listening is absolutely crucial to employees from that wellbeing strategy, isn't it, Dan? That's something that we've found to be crucial, generating those data-driven decisions. So it is we've listened, we've heard, and now we've acted. And that's something that we found to be absolutely vital. Jim, can see that your hand's up. I don't want you to get arm ache. That's just an awful joke that I was going to make. But is there anything you'd add on top of that?
Yeah. I think Dan really nailed something very, very important there. Is once you've done the listening, and I'm not demeaning that in any kind of sense at all, it's very important to listen very carefully. The aim then is to create something which meets the FEAST kind of the acronym. So you know, when you know what the person is like, you can start saying, how do I make it fun and fast so you get quick results? How do I make it easy? How do I make it attractive? How do I make it social? And how do I make it timely? Yeah. Most important of those is easy. People need to make those first steps. Once they find the first steps, they can introduce the harder stuff, which really gives you the dividend. But you've got to start the behavior first. And easy is the most important of those principles in the FEAST acronym.
And so FEAST is fast and fun, easy, attractive, social, and timely.
Timely, yeah.
Fantastic. And I know we've spoken at long length about the platform having all of those acronyms. And I think if we are stressed and we want to access therapy, for example, it needs to be one click away. It needs to be very easy to find, and attractive is something that's absolutely vital as well within there. Jack, coming to you now, from working with global organisations, whether that's internally or whether that's with Champion, with our members, what are the challenges to making things personalised with SMEs all the way through to larger corporates?
Yeah, I think it's been touched on a bit, and I forgot I was on this panel for a second, and I was really enjoying listening to everyone else. Oh, I've got to say something. But in terms of actually understanding that personalisation piece, the individualised side is really difficult, and how to make it specific. Because if you've got an organisation with 10,000 people, good luck. There's going to be an element of, we're going to put something out and hope that engages with as many people as possible. And I know this links into possibly our next point, but what Dan was saying, understanding, listening, what people actually want, so that then if you don't have an end goal, it doesn't matter what direction you go, to find out that end goal so that we can move towards it. And if that is then the personalization, making it as individual as possible, or to groups of people within your organization. Felix is on the call now, who I worked with at BBC, and we had two big differences between the production element and distribution. Two completely different groups of people if you're going to group them into that, but we had to understand how to access, you know, their minds as such to get that engagement. So I know you're going on to the next piece, so I won't drag this out too much longer.
Yeah. Well, also, sorry, Harry.
Laura,
I just wanted to add that I also think, you know, Jack is spot on. One way that we've tried to address that in the Champion platform is by giving people choice. Now, sometimes if we give too much choice, then people can get quite overwhelmed, and then that is exactly the opposite of the FEAST acronym. But actually, as people, we are the experts on ourselves. So as an employer, if we can offer a few different options, then that gives the ability for users to engage with actually what resonates with them, rather than just the one thing that's kind of on offer. A phrase that came to mind when I was just thinking about it, and it should have been on the bingo card, that generally specific. So making things that, you know, kind of generally appeal to as many groups, but also offering that choice and that specificity as well in there. It's a tricky balance to to have.
Thank you, Laura. So to wrap up the first element, I think something that I would love to share is that we do things with, not to. And so we do things with employees. We include them in the individualization of our programs, of our strategies, what we choose in terms of our interventions, the culture that we want to lead with. We don't do things to people and decide it at a senior level and say, this is what we're doing to you. It will most likely not engage the audience. The FEAST model as well is something that is absolutely vital. So making things fun and fast, attractive, easy, social, and timely. So I'm impressed with my brain to remember all of those areas. But make things personalized as possible. On the individual level, how do we make things personalized to them? How do we engage them and bring them in, first of all, as Jim mentioned? On the organizational level, how can we listen to people? And this ties into the next point, which is all around data-driven decisions. So at the moment, when it comes to well-being, a lot of it still is very much gut-led. So I think that we should do this, or I think we may want to do that. And whilst being gut-led is very important and trusting your gut, we need to listen to people and conduct focus groups and listening groups. So the qualitative analysis is absolutely vital in listening to people, gathering that really rich insight into what their experience as an employee currently is and what would benefit them going forwards. The second area is then the quantitative angle. And so that's collecting the numerical data around rates of work-related stress, for example. And we've just seen Peter Kelly pop up. So hello, Peter, from the Health and Safety Executive. And of course, there's the work-related stress legislation that if you have 5 or more employees, many of you do, you must conduct a stress risk assessment on the workforce. So looking at, is bullying an issue? Is workload or senior members of staff or job insecurity from a work-related stress angle? Or is it actually that people and new parents are really struggling with their sleep and they're bringing those issues into the workplace? So from a data-driven angle, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Jack, so you don't just sit back and listen to the expert panel. How important is data to being able to underpin a successful wellbeing strategy?
Yeah, I think it kind of leads into my last point around you need to know where you're going and then what to do about it. I think, you know, you and I, we demo the platform all the time. And my favorite part of our assessment is around stress, because I think all of us can identify if there's a stressful environment that we're in, but we might not know why. And that's where we'll go into that detail of, as you said, is it workload? Is it peers? Is it a lack of control or insufficient training? And that, for me, getting down into the real deep dive into the reasons why is so important. And it's something that we haven't done very often within wellbeing. We've just presumed, very human to presume things and just, well, that means this and move on. But another example of that is worked with an organization recently who they had an increase in terms of their mental health absence. And it was seen as a bad thing, when actually we need to understand that there's more to data than just what is right there. Actually, this environment could possibly be a far better culture now where people are more likely to share their experiences or what they're struggling with, compared to saying, actually, I've got a stomach bug or whatever it might be. So we know how important data is. Obviously, the difficulty is collecting it. And yeah, I'm sure our friend Jim is about to drop some knowledge on me, which I am looking forward to.
I've just got one more question for you, Jack, before I do pass over to Jim. Is there a risk of collecting absence data and using absence data as the main metric for wellbeing strategies?
I think there is a risk because it doesn't give you enough information. But at the same time, what other data are we looking at? Because it's really hard to find. It's not saying that there is easy answers here, but when you're looking at your EAP data, you might have remote GP. If you're lucky to have these other services, brilliant, I can try and collect those. But it's only a real snapshot, an idea of what might be happening to a certain amount of your population. So that's where we need to look at our surveys and all the other assessments without the fatigue as well, and giving people also those opportunities, that listening piece that Dan spoke about, people that opportunity in that space to share more in detail than just a 1 out of 10 survey score at once a year, for example.
Fantastic. We're going to come on to how we can collect that data in a moment's time. And from my experience, absence data has sometimes been quite dangerous to underpin a wellbeing strategy on, because it's looking at 2, 3, maybe 4% of the organisation. It's looking at it very downstream rather than upstream. And often when absence has occurred, we need to do a lot as an organisation, but it can be too late at that stage. And we need to look at the proactive and preventative wellbeing solutions as well. And just to add one final point to that, that on average, 25 to 30% of people are experiencing moderate to severe levels of depression or anxiety within our workforces at any one time. And 2 to 4% on average are off sick at any one time. So there's a large proportion of people as well that the absence data won't actually factor within, that are at risk of really struggling and not bringing their whole selves to work, for example. So thank you for sharing that, Jack. Jim, would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just in terms of behavioural science, there's a really interesting paper by a guy called Groves, and he talks about the real why and the hidden who. And what he's talking about there essentially is the more people who can look at your data in your organisation, the more insights you're going to generate. Which is to say that the people who create a group, but who are not visible as a group, they're threaded through your organization, but they're all united by something common. They may be able to point that out to you without them even noticing it themselves. But if they look at the data and actually start to see what's going on in their own company, you can all start to own the issues. And there's a really important issue there, as you well know, Harry, that when we're in an organization and we feel the we of it rather than the us and the them, you know, we're on it now, aren't we? And we're really all getting the reason why we need to do this.
And I think there is a lot of the us and the them in the unhealthy cultures, and society potentially is feeding that with Brexit versus Remain, all of these societal issues, and home working versus turning up into the office. There's a lot of things that could potentially be dividing us. So I think the more that we can create that we culture, I think that's a hugely important point. And just the second point to add on top of that as well, Jim, is around organisations using secondary data, so data that's published by the likes of Mind. It's amazing, but it's not always relevant to your organisation. And that's what we found, and Dan will share in a moment's time, is that often the data is very different to what the organisation expects.
It's that the concept there is the real why.
Yeah.
And when you do a focus group or something like that, people give you their surface level explanations. That's no use. What you've got to do is catch them unaware, and you've got to create activities which get them to explain something which they weren't expecting to explain in that discussion. That will tell you what their values are. And that's really important.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim. And Dan, before we go through to you, I've just got one question for Laura. In terms of how do we collect this data from, and what can people action off the back of this? How can they go about collecting proactive wellbeing data?
Yeah, so I think the key word is proactive. So obviously what we do at Champion Health is to offer digital health assessments to everybody. So everybody in the workforce, because it's not enough to focus on those people who are unwell and who are struggling. We need to focus on everybody so that the right support can be put in place if things do change, and to get that kind of full picture from the health of your workforce. So that would provide, I guess, the quantitative data, so the numbers that we've been talking about, to highlight the various areas, whether that's mental health, which we've spoken a lot about, but also physical health, so your MSK health, your back pain, knee pain, your nutrition, hydration, all of these areas. I'm not going to say too much more because I might be giving spoilers for the next section. But it's so key to actually consider all these areas of well-being. But then there's also the other things which we've spoken about. So listening groups, employee forums, actually day-to-day conversations, leaders walking the floor. If that's not possible, then creating space in Zoom meetings or team meetings to get a sense of how things are. Because getting engagement with employees giving feedback is tricky. So being creative around how you collect that data is really important. And then I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to track things like engagement with EAPs and other services, and also absence data. But as we were saying before, it's that presenteeism which, you know, absence data on its own just doesn't show the whole picture. And those people who are coming to work unwell are costing organisations much more. And that's why gathering that data is so important.
Thank you, Laura. And to just finish off this point, Dan, one thing that I'm very aware of, and Jack and I talk to our members about, is there's no point in having the data without the right analysis and the right action off the back of it. And that's what you are an expert at, is translating that data into meaningful action. So can you just give a few examples of how you've done that over the last few months with Champion and with our members, and how we can translate that data into actual action? Yeah,
so one of the tricky things, let's assume the data's there and we've taken the right steps forward. We've pulled together lots of percentages and numbers and so on. You then have to create a narrative of actually what story is that data telling you. We have to go through a long process, typically, of actually interpreting what that data is telling you. I like to use individual examples. So if we're looking at people that are, if there's a high percentage of folks that are drinking alcohol over a recommended limit, for example, it's kind of easy to just sort of say, well, maybe it's a coping strategy and so on, and that's sort of one thing. So we can launch a webinar to talk about it, helpful coping strategies. But actually, what is that coping strategy covering? Is it work-related stress, for instance? Is it workload related? Certainly in the last few months, so from our data, we understand that people are experiencing unheard of levels of pressure when it comes to workload, trying to get everything in, working from home, and subsequently other things. People's sleep has fallen off the wagon, their mental health is struggling, alcohol's a little bit higher, and so on. So one of the real challenges with making the data actionable is to work really closely with the organization to try to understand precisely where the pain point really is, so that you don't end up kind of doing the whole sticking plaster approach. I don't think sticking plaster approach was one of the bingo words, which I think it should
be.
Yeah, I just thought of one. Thought of another one. I'll write that on my own list. We want to obviously try and avoid that where we can. So understanding where those key crunch points are for the individuals who are sat at their desk at home trying to work and so on is very difficult, but certainly possible with a wealth of data, especially when you can look at other things like historical engagement surveys, EAP services, other things, pulling all of that together to create a story and a narrative of what's happening. Everything else that flows from there suddenly becomes a lot more impactful, a lot more effective, and actually, ultimately, the return to the business is significantly better. But it's a difficult task, and one in which takes time and energy to do.
I think that's one of the challenges for many organisations, is they've not got someone dedicated for wellbeing, which is probably the sixth point, if we were to have a sixth point that we're predicting going forwards, that at board level there will be people responsible for wellbeing, and that can be a really powerful initiative. But just to wrap up in terms of that, data-driven decisions are going to be absolutely vital going forwards, listening to employees, running listening sessions all the way through to collecting quantitative data and then translating that data into meaningful action. And so employees feel listened to and you're acting upon their wants and their needs, which are often very different to what organisations estimate. So just
Harry, let me come in on that one. This was the one that I put forward, which you didn't put in your 5, right? so let me say what it is. It's a shift in the organisational orientation away from engagement, which is what they must do, towards investment, which is what you are prepared to do, which is what the company is prepared to do. And the second you do that, people can start to say, actually, I'm not feeling this manipulation. For those who feel that way, you can start to see, actually, this company does walk the talk.
Yeah, fantastic. In terms of the comments so far, so Peter, hello. Good to see you. Sarah, hello. Brian's had to drop off and sends his apologies. And we'll go on to the third point in terms of today's session. So the third point is around workplace health will start to focus on all areas of well-being. Now, when it comes to well-being, everyone has their own individual wants, their own individual needs. Some people want support on mental health, and within mental health, there could be anything from anxiety through to lack of connection, it could be work-related stress, but actually it may be sleep and insomnia because they've got a new child. So really looking to focus on all areas, bringing that together, we predict to be a very key area. Laura, can you just add a little bit more in terms of how we can go about that? Because that must be a big challenge for many organisations to focus on these areas.
Yeah, it is. And actually, whenever I think of that all areas, I think there is a tendency to think about the areas as separate. So as you've just said, okay, there's insomnia in this person, but then there's, MSK pain in that person. But actually, for me and from my own personal experience, there is an intimate relationship between your mind and your body. So actually, within an individual, you have your physical health is going to impact on your mental health, and then vice versa. So for me, I don't think there is much benefit from just focusing on one aspect. I guess an example from my experience in Champion and the data is that actually MSK pain is something that is coming up that's a big issue, but actually we don't seem to be talking about it that much. And from the research, we know that those who experience MSK pain also tend to have poorer mental health outcomes. So if we just focus as an organisation on implementing a mental health webinar, then it's, as Dan was kind of alluding at, it's not, you're not understanding the narrative, you're not making the most of all of the data that you have available. So for me, when we talk about all areas of wellbeing, there's definitely that choice element. So, you know, some people, mental health isn't their thing, you know, and we can't force everybody to really engage with it. Maybe it's sleep they want to focus on, but actually it's also for the individual as well, understanding that connection, and yeah, to really help benefit that overall well-being.
And I think an empowerment through, it does absolutely, an empowerment through choice is one of the most important things. Again, when we look at Netflix and what many of our employees will consume, what we will start to do is to realise that there are documentaries, comedies, sitcoms, all the way through to BAFTA award-winning films. And you can see so much of the praise coming through for you, Laura, in terms of that comment. And we want to do the same thing with wellbeing, whereby we're empowering people through choice and we're making it personalised off the back of that data. And we've had a quick question from Chris as well. So where does financial wellbeing fall into this? Right at the forefront alongside everything else, because we know that an individual that is experiencing financial difficulties, instability, they might be keeping themselves awake at night with all of those financial worries. They might be at more risk of anxiety, for example. And that's really the key point, is that everything does tie in together. And it's looking really at that root cause for the individual, that actually they may have been experiencing lower back pain because they're heavily inactive. So instead of just investing in physiotherapy, which can be very effective, physical activity could be a really powerful intervention, or breaking sitting periods, for example. Jim, I'd love to see if you've got any thoughts to add on top of that in terms of looking at it holistically.
The science of multiple behaviour change, it isn't that compelling, and yet the practical experience of it is completely compelling when people get the choice. But I think this is a really important element of onboarding, so getting people into your program. If you can offer events where people can come along and find a success, an immediate success, that now opens the door. And that opens the door then to those other choices that people can make, because they see you as someone who delivers fast.
Yeah.
Now you're onto the FEAST acronym. And when people, and this is especially the case for men, they love quick results. And the second you can get a quick result, turn up, pick up something from a desk at an event, and you just try it and you go, oh, wow, I learned that. That's really powerful for many people. And that then gives them the entree to looking at more of your offer. And so I would regard that as in a gamification concept. They discover your event because they bumped into it on the corridor. Then they pick up that thing on the desk. That's an onboarding experience because it was great. Now you do the scaffolding about getting great at something. And now they pick up on your offer. And then at the end of that, you say, what's our next offer? And that's your end game. And that's the gamification process writ large inside a 10-minute experience.
And I suppose it ties back into that feast element of making things easy within there as well, Jim.
Yeah.
So in terms of wrapping up this area, we've got two more to go through that we'd love to spend a good amount of time on, and then go through a Q&A at the end as well. So I think one of the big things we're predicting is that there's going to be a holistic approach to well-being, whereby all areas of well-being are considered, are looked at in terms of the data-driven element, and it's personalised then to the individual within there. So the fourth element is all about organisations moving from awareness, and this may have happened in your organisation already if you're ahead of the game, but moving from awareness to action. Now, almost all organisations globally will engage in awareness days, whether it's World Mental Health Day or whether it's World Suicide Prevention Day, for example. And that's one of the things that can have a huge impact initially. But if that's all we're doing within our organisations and not translating that awareness into action, that could potentially backfire as a tokenistic gesture, for example, from the organisation. So one of the big things that we are predicting going forwards is that awareness will turn into action. So the question for yourself, Jack, why is now the time, and the awareness has been raised in many organisations around mental health, why is now the time for action, and what's the danger of inaction within our organisations?
Yeah, so awareness is really interesting. I see it as an extension of society, our workplaces, in terms of we've done some amazing things, and there's been people speaking around mental health, there's campaigns, social media has particularly helped with that. And I believe that a lot of people now, and the majority of people, are aware of mental health, well-being, especially with the pandemic, which is another reason for action, but aware that it exists. But the problem is when someone experiences poor mental health or poor well-being, either for themselves or in their environment, we go back into that old mindset, particularly the British people on here, of being stiff upper lip, I don't get this, no, grow a pair being the worst saying that's ever been said. That goes back because we don't have the education and the action. So we're now at a point where I do believe the majority of people are aware of mental health and well-being, but people don't actually know what it is. And that's kind of our next frontier in this kind of campaign in looking for good well-being, in my opinion. And that's complete opinion piece, but yeah.
And Dan, just adding on to that, is there anything you'd add on to Jack's comments? And I guess, are there any examples of really positive action that you can provide to our listeners today?
Yeah, this is, I'll do my very best to not enter into kind of a rant about this one, because as you know, this is one I'm very passionate about. But to some degree, I actually don't blame, senior leaders who are out there who still think that well-being is kind of this slightly fluffy, ambiguous topic that's not necessarily worth the investment. Because as a collective, as an industry, I suppose, we're still stuck to some extent in that kind of awareness piece. Everyone knows a little bit about it, but as Jack, as you rightly say, just working out how we move forwards and actually action things, but also show the benefit of those actions to the organizations and so on, is very difficult. And I think lots of things have contributed to that, but we do understand so much more compared to maybe 5 or 10 years ago on all different levels, whether it's behavior change, whether it's kind of why this is a extremely financially savvy thing to do for organizations, whether it's individual and so on. We've got more than enough to be able to move forwards and actually make a huge impact societally. I'm very blue sky about this, but I hope that we can see ultimately the fabric of how we approach work changing as we move forwards as a result of that. Because culture for me is just revolves around how you do what you do. Well-being, which is this really hard to define thing for many people, is simply how well you feel when you're doing that. Bolting all of those things together, moving forwards into action so people can see and feel the benefits for themselves is where we need to go. And that's probably my biggest prediction, I think, for next year. Initiatives, examples that have worked really well, I'll stick with one, and that is senior leadership. When we've seen people with chief at the start of their title or head of or whoever in a business get on board and start to really understand the business case, but also the moral case and all of that as to why well-being is actually incredibly powerful as a tool, that has been completely transformative within those organizations. I've seen that many times before. And when you compare that to those that don't do that or struggle to get that buy-in, it's like night and day. I think that's one of the most valuable, important things. So the better we can do to kind of pitch this and make senior leaders sit up in their chairs and go, I get it. This is actually something really worth doing and really worth investing in. Well, that's one key to unlocking big success. So,
and Jim, I was just about to pop to you before we move on to the final point. How important is senior leadership and that top-down approach? I think I've hit 2 of the buzz terms.
Yeah, bingo.
in one.
It's I think it's to Chris's point about the moral imperative here. I think it's really important that you get the authority from the senior leadership to do the behaviors, because sometimes they seem a little paradoxical in relation to work, where more effort equals more success. It doesn't. No, normally it's about a better effort and done in a shorter time that gives you the real result. You need that authority to keep doing that, and you need to be reminded of it. That's where senior leaders come in. They provide that authority every day. They tell stories about how important it is to look after yourself and do well. If you're doing that, you're doing the company's work. That's really important for them to do that every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, Laura, can you just add to that? Sorry, you go.
Yeah, very quickly, that's something that I was thinking about, Jim, in terms of that role modeling of the behaviour and really demonstrating to the employees, because to be honest, I'm a bit bored of awareness days. I know they're so important and they've served their purpose, but actually if you keep saying, oh, it's okay not to be okay, but you don't demonstrate that and you don't role model that behavior, it's just going to fall on deaf ears and it's not going to have that impact. So
you need a lot of levers. You need a lot of levers in an organization to make change happen, because the influence that's keeping one person back shifts almost by the day.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So just to recap the penultimate point, that's around moving from awareness to action. I think Laura and Jim, you've hit the nail on the head, and Dan, everything that you mentioned within there, around really looking to shift it from awareness days, which do still have their place without a shadow of a doubt. But I think employees can become disillusioned with them if there's then not the action to really back it up, and that daily action, especially from senior leaders that are our role models. And so the final point that we'll touch upon in today's session before the Q&A is that providers will bring everything together into one ecosystem and journey. So this really ties everything together, especially point 3, which is about focusing on all areas of well-being. What our prediction is that providers will start to offer one journey for all areas, whether that's connecting with other providers, for example. But at the moment, when we look at well-being, it's very disjointed. We've got coaching in one place, we've got an EAP in another, we've got online GP in another, we've got a proactive well-being platform in another area. And going back to Jim's point in terms of that feast model, again, easy being one of the most important elements of it, we need to make that user journey extremely easy for people so they know exactly where to go when they are wanting mindfulness, if that's something that they want, or a masterclass on the menopause, for example. So Jack, would love to get your thoughts on that in terms of the importance, especially your experience having worked for global organizations previously, in bringing that all into one ecosystem to make it easy for, first of all, the people purchasing the platform, but secondly, the people using it and the boots on the ground.
Yeah, I think, as you said, the feast model is imperative with this one. And the main thing for me is when you first look at wellbeing strategy, a lot of people go straight for leadership. So role modeling, permission, get that in place, but also creating that one hub. So it's one place for wellbeing. So people know if I have an issue or I'm interested in it, whatever it might be, this is where I go. The problem is the first thing that we all do is go, oh yeah, we've got an intranet, it's grey, and I can put it 500 clicks away. And it also has a company logo right in the middle of it, which then has the trust issue. So we still don't get the engagement. So it's also understanding how we package that up so that people feel they can trust it. They want to engage with it. All the feast model that Jim talks about and I love. So that was a massive point for us. And everyone's trying to do it in their own way. But I think we need to be far more creative with that so that we get that engagement.
Laura, would you have anything to add as head of product at Champion around how either we're looking to do it or the best examples of companies doing it in the space at the moment?
Yeah, I think Jack's kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of making it easy, making it accessible, and that, you know, it's the feast model again that really defines the way that we approach it at Champion. So we're bringing everything into one place, all areas, but also signposting to the most relevant support for that individual. So actually bringing together all we've spoken about today in terms of that personalisation, that accessibility, it's so important, because when, as an individual, if you're struggling, you're not going to be thinking, oh, where's that internet, where's that leaflet? I mean, when I worked in the NHS, I didn't even know we had an EAP until I had to root through a box in a cupboard, and then I dug out a leaflet, an EAP leaflet, and it was a very difficult experience. So making everything in one place and attractive, but also thinking about accessibility as well. I've been doing some recent research around the neurodiverse population and actually what kind of content really resonates for them. If do we want things that are very text heavy, or is it something that's quick, easy, it's one click away? You know, think about the population that you have in your organization and tailor it to them.
Fantastic.
Harry, if I could come in on that. There is an interesting, an unspoken bias that happens amongst all us do-gooders. Okay, and it's this, it's called a thick skin bias, right? And if you say at any point they'll just have to suck it up, which is to say you're not bothered to design it so they can get one click, they have to do 5 or 6, you're just saying suck it up. That means you've got a thick skin bias, and your most needy client can't access you, whatever you've got to offer, because of your thick skin bias. You've got to work super hard for the groups who you think have got to suck it up. And you need to look quite hard about that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're continually working on as wellbeing leads, is how can we get the communications out there to everyone to make it as easy as possible. And that's a big challenge, especially with remote workforces and everything.
But you can see how, you know, you could say to me, Jim, that's not good enough because those people find that too difficult. I just go, why can't they do it?
Yeah,
but that's my thick skin bias coming to play here. You still got to design it wonderfully well. And one of the things I would say, and this is me speaking about Champion Health as an outsider, it's just so well designed because it is easy clicks, and that's so superbly important.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Laura, as well. And so just to recap that final point around providers bringing everything into one ecosystem, a really seamless journey, making sure everything's one click away. People know where to access things at their darkest moment, or actually if they're just wanting to support their sleep, for example, making it personalized to the user as well. So tying in all of those areas that we've discussed today. So we've had some comments from Tina. So Tina's mentioned, I agree, it's going to be important to keep it all together and accessible for employees, but also taking it even further. I also think it's about including wellbeing holistically into the overall reward and benefit strategy. And that's a huge area we discussed, Tina, as a champion team, was that I think it's wellbeing is going to tie into diversity and inclusion going forwards, learning and development, all the way through to rewards and benefits. And it's going to really sit as the foundation level within the organization. Bex has agreed with Tina as well, and it should be part of their benefits package. And so that you can choose what wellness perk you have available. So exactly, again, everything we've been speaking about today. Katrina has praised Jim for the very interesting point about the thick skin bias as well. What we will do to conclude today's session is, if there are any other questions that you would like to send through, we can get back to them at some point in the next day or so. In terms of the 5 predictions that we've covered today, personalisation will become the most important factor for success with employee well-being. Organisations will start to really focus, if not already, on making data-driven decisions, and that's off the back of listening sessions, walking the floor, as Laura mentioned, if that's possible, all the way through to collecting proactive, quantitative well-being data. Workplace health will include all areas of well-being going forwards. It'll be holistic, it will be integrated together. Organisations will move beyond awareness into action. So beyond the awareness days, they will still be a thing, but really translating into meaningful action. Finally, this ties in all of the areas. Providers will start to bring everything together into one ecosystem and journey. So they're the 5 predictions for workplace health going forwards. So in terms of the workplace health bingo, I think we have completed it all, to be honest. I think the only one word is probably unprecedented that we've stayed away from. But lastly, I just wanted to wish you a very Merry Christmas from the whole of the Champion team. This last year has been incredibly tricky for us, taking care of not only our own well-being, but the people around us. And hopefully this Christmas, you're able to take some time to rest and recover, and you've taken one thing away from today's session to be able to implement into your wellbeing strategy in 2022. For all of our clients that have joined today, thank you so much for all of the amazing work that you're doing. And for anyone that's looking to join the Champion journey, we're really excited to work alongside you in 2022 as well. So very Merry Christmas. Thank you to our panel, and thank you to you all for joining today's session.